Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining in. My name is Matipon. I'm from Thailand, and I will be talking to you about build, bridging the gap between different learning cultures. Now, here's one thing I think we don't talk about often enough. Learning is a cultural process. And as with anything cultural, each culture kind of does it differently. Every time we move to a different country, we get something called culture shock. Or if you've ever given a lecture for an audience, you might find that there are additional barriers that you wouldn't normally get from your home audience. For example, you might find that your joke aren't as funny in a different country anymore. And for a good example, if I were to do a knock-knock joke like this one, a lot of English-speaking audience might find this pretty funny. But the audience who are not really familiar with this particular style of joke can be a little confused. In fact, if I were to ask this in a real person who never heard a knock knock joke before, it might go something like this. Why is that? Well, when you start asking a joke like this one, there are some certain expectation that you and reactions that's supposed to be met. And if they're not familiar with that, they don't know what the proper response is supposed to be. And even if they know the response, the general sense of what they find funny could be entirely different from yours. So your joke is a very much loss of a translation. But why is it that when it comes to education, we usually talk as if we can just simply translate one lesson and technique from one culture and expect it to work for every other culture? Now, don't get me wrong, personally, I think we as human have a lot of share a lot of ways in which we learn or process new information. And a lot of the difficulties we encounter with learning are universal. So there is a merit to learning how other cultures around the world have approach to learning and try to adapt it to your own. But the key point here is that nothing will be readily translatable from one culture to the next. There will have to be adjustments to make it fit with your own learning culture. Those that share similar culture might not have to do much to adapt, but those that come from completely different background will find that they have the work cut out for them. However, since every culture is different, it will be impossible for me to spell out exactly what each and everyone needs to do to adapt to your own culture. Instead, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to draw from my own anecdotes and my own experience at trying to adapt a certain teaching strategy to my own Thai students. But first, let's do some quick background about Thailand. I'm from Thailand, and around here, typical classroom size is about 40 to 60, which is very large compared for many of you. And because of the size, a lot of instruction is done, it's mostly lecture-based, and interactions are kept very minimal, and directions of information only flows one direction. It's formal, structured, disciplined, and as a culture, it's almost a taboo for a student to argue with their teacher. So it is unheard of it's highly discouraged for students to speak up against their own teacher. And this would be very different experience for something like a group discussion that are very common in the Western world. And in the group discussion, the information travels multidirectionally. Students are encouraged to engage and challenge each other's beliefs, and not just their own peers, but also the teachers as well. And now, just to be clear, I'm not claiming that we have to necessarily compare which one is better, which is more superior, because probably each one has their own pros and cons, and that fits well with their own context of culture. However, there are certainly some aspects that one can learn from the other. The thing with the learning culture is when you're placed in the same learning environment with the same expectation on you for years or decades, it becomes a culture and it can change how you approach learning. If the culture doesn't encourage you to express your opinion, then you tend to suppress it. And possibly one of the biggest challenges that Thai students are facing right now is their lack of critical thinking and any task related to critical thinking. And for me personally, this is particularly problematic because one of the things I do is I run a student workshop to get them to engage in science project. And it's very difficult for them to do good science project if they don't know how to criticize, how to think critically about what each of their measurements and whether the method they're using makes sense or not. So the problem then, how do we get them to promote critical thinking? You might think that, well, one of the really effective methods that helps students to engage their own beliefs and, think critically about questions at hand is group discussion. So what happens if we just apply group discussion to Thai students to get them to think critically? Well, for example, let's ask an open-ended question like, should we waste resource in space exploration? What we think would happen in student head, and this is probably true for a lot of Western audience, is that, well, they're gonna think, well, there are some pros and cons. There are some good sides and bad sides, and well, let's weigh them. Which is more important and why? What are the reasoning? What are the justification why we should do one over the other? That's what we think going on in their head. But from my own experience with using similar questions to this with high students is entirely different. Well, what's going on in their head, first of all, is nothing. I've had an incident where I asked them, give them an open-ended question, give them, hey, talk to your peers. And they just stared blankly right back at me. Why is that? Well, because this task is completely foreign to them. This is unfamiliar. It's like asking a knock-knock joke to someone who's never heard the joke before. They don't know what they are expected to do. And the expectation for them is also for them not to say anything. Their job in the classroom, in the lecture-based classroom, is to sit quietly and try your best not to disrupt the class. And they're not used to the idea that that a question, open-ended question, because their job in class is to provide a one single correct answer. And when you throw them an open-ended question, sometimes they get really intimidated. They don't know what the correct answer is. They're too afraid of making the wrong mistakes or admitting they don't know the answer to provide the answer. They don't want to embarrass themselves. And they do not believe that keeping the lesson flowing is part of their job. And arguing with their friends can be very, very difficult because culturally we try to avoid confrontation with your peers. So unless you break these cycles, interactions can't really happen. Question is not going to work in this setting. What you need is a proper framing before they can feel comfortable. So the easiest framing is the first thing you need to do, I did, is, well, you need to tell them this is not just another classroom. Leave your own expectation outside. Now, this is easier if you have a semester long that you can build over time. Eventually, they'll adapt to your style and they'll go off into the classroom knowing, oh, this is a different kind of classroom. But if you only have a few minutes, the easiest way is to literally take them out of the classroom. Remove the chairs, remove the board, have them sit on the ground, facing each other, play some games, and like, hey, this is not just a class. This is about you can have fun, you can relax, enjoy yourself. You need to inspire and challenge them to think. If thinking isn't natural to them, you have to tell them, like, look, this is part of your job. This is what we expect from you to do. You have to be active in this class, and you have to think for your own benefit. And it's a lot easier than done, but you have to require some sort of practice. And then you do small incremental steps. Well, if they're afraid to talk to a lot of strangers, maybe first write down the question. Maybe start with a smaller group and then go bigger and bigger. Start with a free inquiry is not going to work if they've never done free inquiry before. So maybe start with structured inquiry and start relaxing. First helping them out and then withdraw the help so they can be more independent on their own. And you can play to their strengths. If what they want to do is provide the answer, then give them an answer. Give them a question. Give them a solid looking sheet for them to fill out. After they fill out, now they can freely talk about what they've already written down to your peers. And if they don't want to argue with each other, invent a new fictitious person. Mary claimed this is true. Can you all help argue why Mary is wrong? And these are some of the things that I've found to work. The conclusion is many aspects of different learning difficulties share among all cultures. It is good to keep looking what other cultures are done and see what can be applicable to your own case. But the important thing is there will be a lot of trials and many, many more errors. You just have to keep trying. Thank you.